So the NBA draft withdrawal deadline has come and gone, and we now know the prospects that are keeping their names in the 2026 NBA draft and who is returning to college basketball for another season. And we already knew that guys like Morez Johnson Jr., Christian Anderson, Henry Vasar, Isaiah Evans, and Abuka Okori were all staying in the draft, but there's still a ton of other names who just made their decision, so let's jump into it. And we have to start with Koa Peat from Arizona because the biggest decision of the entire withdrawal deadline to me was Peat. And I think this one comes with real risk because Peat is staying in the 2026 NBA draft, even though his draft stock clearly took a hit during the pre-draft process. He did not scrimmage at the combine, he struggled in the shooting drills there as well, and the bigger concern to me is that his shot mechanics look completely different than what we saw during his freshman season with the Wildcats, and that's going to matter because the jumper has always been the swing skill of his. Inside the arc though, Peat has been very effective. He shot 53.5% on two-pointers, and he has the strength to bully defenders around the rim. But being an undersized forward like Peat means that you really need to have some sort of perimeter jumper, and that's just one thing he has not showcased. And right now, he is going to be picked probably in the mid to more likely the late of the first round in the 2026 NBA draft. And now I still think he hears his name in round 1, but returning to Arizona could have made him a much safer bet for the lottery for the 2027 NBA draft. But the next biggest decision of the NBA draft withdrawal deadline has to be Milan Momcilovic from Iowa State. And Momcilovic decided that he's going to return to college basketball. And this is one of the clearest examples of where the sport is right now with NIL. From an NBA standpoint, there may not be a ton more he can prove as a shooter because he's a 6'8" shot maker who hit 49% from 3 on 7.5 attempts per game with Iowa State, which is elite volume and elite efficiency from deep. But instead of staying in the draft, he's back in college and currently in the transfer portal and is the #1 player that is available, and it instantly makes him the biggest free agent in the sport. Kentucky, St. John's, UCLA, Louisville, and now Arizona are all reportedly interested in Milan Momcilovic, and basically every team that needs shooting should be involved. And the Arizona fit is especially interesting to me now after Koa Peat stayed in the draft because they have a clear need there at the 4 spot. And Momcilovic, to me, isn't just a good portal player. He's the kind of player who can change a team's outlook overnight. And from everything that we've heard, I think this recruitment is going to go quick, and we should know where Momcilovic is going to end up within a week or so. But the biggest shock to me of the deadline came from Tounde Yessoufou from Baylor, because for most of the pre-draft process, it sounded like he was focused on playing professionally in the NBA next season. And to me, he was viewed as a late first round or early second round type of prospect. And there was even talk that he had not seriously considered returning to college at all. But then shortly after the deadline passed, everything changed because it was announced that Yessoufou would be withdrawing from the draft and committing to St. John's, and that is a massive win for Rick Pitino. Yessoufou averaged 18 points and 6 rebounds as a freshman at Baylor, and he gives St. John's the exact type of athlete that they want. He is physical, can score, can defend, and he fits the Red Storm identity perfectly to me. And it's not just a good pickup for Pitino, but this could be one of the biggest roster moves of the offseason in all of college basketball. But one name that we're still actually waiting on for clarity as to what his decision was is Meleek Thomas from Arkansas. But based on everything around his draft process, it feels like he is trending towards staying in the NBA draft this season. Thomas is coming off a really strong freshman season at Arkansas where he averaged 15.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists, while shooting 43.5% from the field and nearly 42% from deep. And the shooting number is key for him because that is his main selling point to teams at the next level. And at 6'5" with real scoring tools and a projectable NBA guard frame, he checks a lot of boxes for teams, and he may not have completely popped during combine testing, but the feedback that I've heard seems strong enough for him to land in the late first round conversation, which is exactly where I have him. And with several other players returning to school, the back end of the first round and the early part of the second round may be thinning out, and that could help Thomas immensely. But Arkansas did get one major win in the NBA draft withdrawal deadline, and that's because Billy Richmond is returning to the Razorbacks, and it's huge for John Calipari and co., especially because there was some real uncertainty around his decision. Richmond had a strong enough sophomore season to get attention from the NBA. He averaged 11 points, 4.5 rebounds, 2 assists, and nearly 2 stocks per game, and he also shot 56% from the field, which just shows how effective he was at attacking the basket and playing within himself. But the concern has always been the jumper, as he shot just 26% from 3, and that is probably the swing skill for his NBA stock. But as a defender, an athlete, and a two-way piece, he absolutely has traits that can go to the next level. But now, returning to Arkansas, he becomes the Swiss Army knife on a roster that I believe has Final Four upside. And if the offensive skill takes another step, like I really think it will with him as a junior, Richmond could move from second-round conversation into the top 20 range of the 2027 NBA draft. Another player that's returning to school in the SEC is Amari Allen, who is returning to Alabama, and it's one of those decisions that I think it feels smart for both sides. And last season, Alabama got a surprise return from LeBaron Philon, and this year it's Amari Allen, and he was productive enough to stay in the draft conversation after averaging 11.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 assists as a freshman with the Crimson Tide, but the Combine made his decision a bit clearer. Allen measured shorter than his listed height at Alabama, as he came in at just over 6'5", but he also showed off big-time athleticism there with a 42.5-inch vertical. So now the question became simple of what his long-term position is. And at Alabama next season, he should get more on-ball reps, more offensive responsibility, and a chance to prove he can be more than just a high-level athletic wing at the next level. And Nate Oates has plenty of talent on his roster, but Allen definitely has the highest ceiling, and if he becomes a more polished creator next season, he could turn himself into a lottery candidate for 2027. But one player that I think might have made the biggest decision of a team in the NBA draft withdrawal deadline was Tyler Tanner, who decided to return to Vanderbilt, and without him, the Commodores were probably not even close to a preseason top 25 team. But now, I think the Commodores have a legitimate case to be in the top 15. Tanner was one of the best guards in the country last season, averaging nearly 20 points and 5 assists while shooting 49% from the field, which is elite production at the college level. But the concern at the next level of the NBA is obvious. He measured under 5'11" at the Combine, and for smaller guards, the margin for error is always tougher, and he didn't really show out as much as I would have expected during the Combine scrimmages. But still, coming back to college basketball, he is a star, and he gives Vanderbilt an SEC Player of the Year candidate, a preseason All-American type of guard, and the kind of offensive engine that can carry a team deep into March. And I think him and Ace Glass are going to be one of the best dynamic duos there in the backcourt in all of the SEC next season. But another big winner from the withdrawal deadline is Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats with the return of Malachi Moreno, and Kentucky needed this one badly. This offseason has been under a microscope because Kentucky missed on several major targets like Robert Wright III, Donnie Freeman, and then Tyron Stokes, but they did recover that by landing Alex Wilkins from Furman and Zoom Diallo from Washington. But Moreno coming back gives this roster some real stability there in the front court. As a freshman, he averaged 8 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game, and he flashed the most long-term upside of Kentucky's young front court pieces that they had. And there was a point where his decision got really interesting as to whether or not he would stay in the draft, especially after he withdrew from 5-on-5 scrimmages at the Combine, because that had some people wondering, including myself, if an NBA team had given him a promise already. But now he is back, and he should have a much bigger role next season in Lexington almost immediately. But one of my favorite players who decided to return to college basketball next season is Matt Abel, and he started his freshman year at NC State with one-and-done buzz, but the year did not really play out that way. He averaged just 9 points a game and didn't start at all for the Wolfpack, but then he entered the transfer portal this offseason, committed to North Carolina, and suddenly rebuilt some of his draft momentum with a strong performance at the draft Combine. He played well in the scrimmages and shot the ball at an extremely high level, which made people people wonder if he could actually stay in the draft, but instead he withdrew and will play for Mike Malone at UNC, and that's huge because Abel should step into a major role alongside Neoclis Avdalis and Terrence Brown there on the perimeter, and if he builds on what he showed at the Combine, he could become one of the breakout players in the ACC. But UNC's rival and the Duke Blue Devils also got massive news from the withdrawal deadline because John Blackwell has decided to return to college and will be transferring to Duke, and that gives the Blue Devils exactly what they needed on the offensive end, which is a proven bucket getter there in the backcourt. Blackwell averaged over 19 points per game at Wisconsin this past season and earned all Big Ten honors, but he was not viewed as a lock to be drafted. At the Combine, he definitely helped himself in the scrimmage settings by scoring 16 points and showing real shot making in one of the scrimmages, but the measurements definitely hurt. He came in at 6'3¼ barefoot with a 6'2¼ wingspan, which was the shortest wingspan measured at the Combine, and that is going to be a concern at the next level. But staying in college basketball and for Duke, he is a perfect college guard, and with Isaiah Evans staying in the draft, Duke needed someone who can create late in the clock, and Blackwell gives them just that, and now Duke may be the deepest team in the country next season. Another big name that withdrew from the NBA draft was Flory Bidunga, and he will be returning to college and transferring to Louisville, and has been one of the biggest front court players out of the portal of the offseason. At one point, he left the door open to staying in the draft, but the feedback that it seems he received made the decision pretty clear. He was not tracking as a first-round pick in any of the mocks that I've seen, and after measuring in at the Combine at 6'7¾ without shoes, the NBA questions became louder, but the rest of his profile is extremely exciting. He has a 7'3" wingspan, a 40.5-inch max vertical, and is one of the most explosive defensive bigs in all of college basketball, and that is why his return to college basketball is such a big win for Pat Kelsey and the Cardinals, because Bidunga can anchor Louisville's defense immediately, and next to Iowa transfer Alvaro Folgueras, he gives the Cardinals one of the most physically imposing frontcourt combinations in the country this upcoming season. But another player out of the portal that I was hoping would return to college basketball is Allen Graves, but he decided to stay in the 2026 NBA draft, and that's a major hit to the transfer portal market right now. Graves is one of the best uncommitted players available, and schools like LSU, Duke, and Kentucky were reportedly all interested, but instead of returning to college, he is starting his professional career, and his rise has been incredible though. Graves was an unranked recruit, redshirted his first season at Santa Clara, and then became one of the biggest breakout freshmen in the country this past season. He swept the WCC Freshman of the Year, Sixth Man of the Year, and Defensive Player of the Year honors, and although he was not viewed as a guaranteed first rounder when the process started, he helped himself enough to become a projected top 20 or first round type of pick. And for college teams still chasing talent, this one really hurts late in May, but I think an NBA team is going to get a great one in Allen Graves. But my biggest winner from the NBA draft withdrawal deadline is Todd Golden and the Florida Gators, and that's because Reuben Chinyelu has decided to return to Florida, and to me, that obviously makes the Gators the preseason #1 team in the country. Florida already had an incredible retention this offseason with Thomas Houck, Alex Condon, Boogie Flan, and Urban Clavzar all back in the mix. And now add in Reuben Chinyelu, who is the reigning Naismith Defensive Player of the Year, and this front court becomes absolutely terrifying. And Chinyelu had a strong combine, especially in the 5-on-5 scrimmages, and measured in with a plus 10.25-inch wingspan. But even with that, he's still projected more as a second-round pick, so returning to Gainesville makes a lot of sense here. And now he gets to chase another deep run in March, potentially another national championship, and continue building his NBA stock in a bigger role with the Gators. And between Chinyelu, Houck, and Condon, Todd Golden has the best front court in all of college basketball once again, and Florida now looks like the early team to beat next season. But another team that got a huge retention piece from the withdrawal deadline was Illinois, with Andrej Stojakovic returning to the Illini and keeping them firmly in the national title conversation for next season. This past season, Stojakovic was a key part of the team that made the Final Four, and now he comes back for his senior year with a chance to become an even bigger offensive piece. Last year, he averaged 13.5 points on 50% shooting, and his slashing ability gave Illinois a different kind of weapon on the offensive end. But the next step for him is his three-point shot, and NBA teams are definitely going to want to see him become a more consistent perimeter shooter, and that would change his draft projection in the 2027 NBA draft. But for college basketball next season, this is a major return, as Brad Underwood now has Stojakovic, David Mirkovic, the Ivisic brothers, Jake Davis, and Providence transfer Stevan Box all in the mix, and that is size, skill, versatility, and matchup problems all over this lineup, and Illinois is going to be right back in the top 5 conversation nationally. And lastly, we got Jeremy Fears Jr., who is returning to Michigan State, and he gives Tom Izzo one of the best point guards in all of college basketball next season. Fears was already expected to return, but his combine performance made the decision more interesting. He showed real playmaking ability, including an 11-assist scrimmage, but he also measured in around 6 foot without shoes and did not shoot the ball particularly well in the drills, which likely kept him in the second round range. But in college, he is a star, as Fears averaged 15 points and led the nation with 9.5 assists per game this past season, and that kind of table setting changes everything for Michigan State's outlook. He should be a preseason All-American candidate and one of the faces of the Big Ten Conference, and with Fears back in the fold, Michigan State likely belongs somewhere in the preseason top 10 or 15, and maybe even higher depending on how the rest of this roster shapes out. But that wraps it up for today's video. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of all of the players' stay or go decisions, and who do you think made the right or wrong decision. Also, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.